What better place to be than straight out of Danbury, kids? Rhymes with Yongari, Monster of the Deep. Cheap Korean Godzilla knockoff movie from 1950, 60, whatever. See, look at that. I've been on the air for less than 10 seconds and I'm already turning into a rambling man. That's why you folks, at least that's part of the reason why you tune in to Tent Talks Tunes, because I'm good at doing the ramble. Welcome aboard, everybody. Let me make a quick adjustment to the camera, make sure that all of my fabulous props and propagandas are clearly visible on the camera. We got vinyl on one side, we got the shameless self-promotion on the other. I'd like to get everybody's attention to my Discogs and eBay store. Look me up on Discogs, TPOS. Look me up on eBay, Trash American Style, the name of my former brick and mortar store, where I had 21 years of service to you, the record buying public. Yes, indeed. Doug Finkelstein chimes in and says that Yongari was a great film. The only thing I remember, really, what I remember most about Yongari, Monster of the Deep, was that there's this one close-up shot of Yongari, and Yongari is sort of like turning towards the camera and breathing fire. And just as Yongari comes face to face with the camera, you see the pipe protruding out of Yongari's throat, or the miniature model thereof that's bellowing the fire. I guess they were breaking down the third wall. I don't know. It was kind of disillusioning for me as a young kid who loved Japanese, Korean, Belgian, Swedish monster movies of any sort. Put a guy in a rubber suit and have him knock down a miniature city, and I'm your friend for life, man. Yongari, Monster of the Deep. I'm sure there's like a 10-disc deluxe reissue version of that out there somewhere. And if anybody's got it, Doug's got it. So feel free to comment about Yongari, Monster of the Deep. Let's talk about the mail, shall we? It's been a pretty darn good week for mail here at Malcolm Tent's World Headquarters, TPOS. I'll show you the address, as I always do. It's right there. P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470. I guarantee you it's blurry, but it works. Even if you can't read it there on the camera, you can be sure that P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut, 06470 is very much functioning and very much alive and well, because that's where I got the latest issue of the Bridge and Tunnel Crowd, my favorite crypto progressive publication. It's got its domination headquarters in New Haven, Yonkers, and I believe Paterson, New Jersey. I have very barely been able to understand a single issue yet that they've published. That's why I love it so much. Bridge and Tunnel Crowd. Read every single time I get one by me, Malcolm Tent, from Danbury, Connecticut. What else did we get in the mail? Oh, a nice package from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Look at all these CDs by Before I Hang. Yes, Before I Hang. They have a split 10-inch EP with my band, or I should say the band I'm in, the Almighty Anti-Scene. Came out on the great label Jackhammer Records out of Japan, and they did have some copies here in the States. Don't know if the record's sold out yet, but I think it's pretty close. So Before I Hang from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. These guys are great. Love them. And so when I go down to Charlotte in about probably a month and a half to start recording the next Anti-Scene album, there's a hot tip for you. You can be sure that I'll have some Before I Hang in the CD player, because that 13-and-a-half-hour drive goes by a lot more quickly when I've got stuff to listen to in my antiquated CD player. I will also be, I'm pretty sure, listening to a couple of new albums that I really wasn't expecting. I think if any of you people know my ancient history, my first ever band when I lived in South Florida was called Broken Talent. And I'm still in touch with just about everybody from Broken Talent, including the lead singer, Big Caesar Santo, who is still making music on his own. And he just sent me 2 brand new albums. 565, The Number of the Least, and one called Helping Hand. And I was actually very surprised to see that this dude that we knew from high school, a guy named Ken Berry, is on both of these albums. And cool and very interesting and probably heavily influenced by the Third Velvet Underground records. So thank you, Big Santa, wherever you are. I'll be checking these out. Dennis Highland from the aforementioned Jackhammer Records says that the 10-inch records are not quite sold out yet. Some will be up for sale soon this Friday online. So there you go. If you've missed out so far, you don't have to miss out forever. There will be some. This is a very cool thing I got in the mail. I love to support artists. I love art, like real art made by real people. A lot of the stuff that I've released on my label, the aforementioned TPOS, features art by artists. For example, this awesome logo of the masked TPOS wrestler was drawn by a guy named Frank Oblak from Cleveland, Ohio. I love his pen and ink work. So I commissioned him to do this stunning piece of art featuring myself and Mad Brother Ward from the Almighty Anti-Scene, because we've got a little project cooked up which is going to be released very soon. And as you can tell, the two of us are up to no good at all. But that's the original pen and ink drawing by Frank Oblak that's going to grace the cover of this upcoming release. That, my friends, is real art. Look at it. It's on a real piece of paper with a fold in it and everything. If you look carefully, you'll see there's pencil marks and pen and ink. Salute to anybody who does computer graphics. I do a lot of computer graphicing myself and a lot of computer layouting myself and a lot of inventing of computerized terms like graphicing. For people who can actually take an implement and draw stuff on paper, because I can't do it. It is utterly beyond my ability. My skill set does not include drawing stuff on paper. So I'm very excited about that. And the last thing we got in the mail is really cool. My friend Josh Stockinger, I don't know if it's Stockinger or Stockinger. We only communicate by email. But Josh has a company called Gruesome Gifts. And you can imagine with a name like Gruesome Gifts, it's going to be pretty weird. He sent me a whole box of stuff. And, you know, it takes a certain kind of jaundiced, sick, twisted sense of humor to make this a People's Temple puzzle. I don't know how many pieces there are, but, you know, if you've got some pesky neighbors and they want to come over and play board games or make puzzles with you, and you don't want them around, just whip this out. You'll probably get rid of them real fast. I love this. And any people who are aficionados of G.G. Allin will be delighted, as I was, when you open up the box and you find a set of drink coasters. And that's the first one looking at you. I almost cracked up when I saw that. That was hilarious. This is hilarious. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, then you better get it. So thanks, Josh. I sent Josh a little something in return. I hope he likes it. Because that's the thing. If you send me something in the mail, I am practically guaranteed to send you something back in return. Whether you like it or not, whether you want to get something in return or not, I'm going to send you something. Because I really love going through my archives and my stock to send cool people cool stuff when they send something to me. So P.O. Box 3626, Newtown, Connecticut. Don't regret it. Don't forget it. Let's make each other rich culturally, kids. Culturally. Let's see who else is tuned in here. Oh, I got a whole bunch of people here. Joseph Charles says Malcolm for president. Nah, I don't want that job. Joseph Charles, you can have it. You got my vote if you decide to run, but I'm not doing it. I'm just the guy who plays records. Ribopuff Law, hello. Let's talk about 78's, shall we? 78 RPM records. As I said in my little blurb, my lead up to this episode of Tent Talks Tunes, no format is obsolete if somebody's still around to play them. And, you know, a lot of writers, a lot of bloggers, a lot of pundits make a lot of hay over, you know, the obsolescence of this musical format, which is, of course, hand in hand accompanied by the resurgence of some other format and blah, 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 blah. It gets kind of tiresome. The thing is, as long as there is a player for a certain type of music, it exists, and it's real, and it's legit, and it's valid. And I'm going to talk about another one of the earliest records I remember. I, of course, left it in the other room. I was so busy grabbing the mail and so busy grabbing the records I'm going to talk about that I, of course, forgot to bring the first two pieces of my presentation. So I'm going to make like the substitute teacher. All you people in class here right now, Amelia up in New Hampshire, the mysterious John, James Burns, all you guys sort of talk to each other, but be polite, play quietly. I have to leave the room for just a second. I'm going to be back, all right? So you behave yourselves. I'm going to be back in 1 second because I got something to show you and it's important. I'm still here. You can't see me, but you can hear me. I'm here. I'm here. Whoa. All right, and then of course you hear the teacher's footsteps clomping down the hall, and the teacher comes back into the room. Now, did everybody behave themselves while I was gone? I don't want to know, because I know the answer. And y'all gonna be lying to me if I ask you. All right, I'm back. Just a very brief, very brief history of ancient formats of music. The very first type of record that was available on the marketplace, and in fact the very first type of music ever recorded, was the cylinder. Like one of these here. This is an Edison wax cylinder, and this is the first type of record. Look at this thing. It's a cylinder. It's round, it's black, but it's not flat. The grooves are actually cut concentrically on the surface of the record like this. And you would have to take the record and mount it on a cylinder, and it would revolve. You drop the needle on this edge, and the needle would travel across it, and the music would play through a giant horn. First records were cylinders, and they're kind of cool, but they're really impractical, you know, because they have, you know, you needed like a special cabinet to store it. It takes up a lot of room. You can only fit, you know, I think maybe 2 or 3 minutes of music on the outside of it, and there's really nothing else you can do with them. You know, they're of course kind of lo-fi. So cylinders, you know, had a bit of popularity for a while when they were the only thing on the market. But then some bright spark came up with the idea of taking these grooves, and instead of having them run concentrically in a vertical fashion, have them run concentrically in a horizontal fashion. Ah, that's when we came across this thing here that we all know as the record. And they were these flat, usually black, always fragile, heavy discs made out of anything from wax to shellac. I've seen old 78 RPM records that were like literally a piece of cardboard with a coating of shellac on them. And for years and years and years and years after the cylinder was made obsolescent, the 78 RPM 10-inch record was the industry standard. And it was kind of like the shellac, kind of like the cylinder. You could fit about 3 minutes aside, maybe more, but about 3 minutes. It played at 78 RPM. It was not quite hi-fi, but a little more hi-fi than a cylinder. And, you know, they sold millions and millions and millions and millions of these things back in the day. This was the only way that you could buy recorded music for a very, very long time. It was on a 78 RPM 10-inch disc. And anybody who's ever gone to a thrift shop or a record meet knows that there are literally millions and millions and millions of them still out there. And the vast majority of them are pretty bad. They're antiquated. They're of a type of music that has not weathered well over the years. The vast majority of them are really about good for the landfill, but there are some cool 78s. There are some cool 78s. We're going to talk about some of those cool ones. This is the first 78 RPM record I ever came into contact with. I remember going to my grandparents' house, and if we want to backtrack just a little bit, if you've seen some of my previous episodes of Tent, Talks, Tunes, you might remember me talking about my earliest memory of records at all, which was watching a Beatles record turn around on the giant hi-fi console in my parents' living room. The first record I was ever actually able to handle with my own two hands when I was, like 4 years old, something like that. And the first record that I remember the sound of, and I remember playing, and I can still hear the sound of this record echoing in my dome to this very day, was a 78 RPM album. And there's another key term for you, album, because since the 78s could only hold one song per side, and they only had a couple of minutes per side, you had to put them in an album, literally an album, to get a bunch of selections together. So an album, that's an album, kids. That's where the word comes from. My earliest memory is an album that belonged to my mom, the Woodpecker Talent Show. Oh my God. I could probably recite this to you note for note, word for word, if I really had to. If you put me under hypnosis, definitely. I played this record over and over and over and over and over again on 78 RPM on a record player that my grandparents had. It was a portable record player in that it was about this big, but it had a handle on top. Therefore, it was portable. Hey, Janice. It weighed about 75 pounds, but it had a handle on it, so it was portable. And it was yellow plastic, and you would unlatch this little latch on the top, and the part that played the record would fold out. Like the turntable and the arm and the changer would fold out. And it was kind of wobbly because it was on a spring. And then when you're done playing your records, you fold it back up, put on the latch, and grab it by the handle, all 75 pounds of it, and schlep it out of the room. So I'd play this Woody Woodpecker record over and over and over and over again. And of course, the original got lost to time. But I found this copy at a record swap a few years ago and said, dude, gotta have it. $5. $5 well spent. So my earliest interaction with actual recorded music was a 78 RPM album of Woody Woodpecker. And I never really thought about 78s very much after that because, I was very young. 78s were obsolete. And the only 78s you could find were, stuff like Woody Woodpecker, which I had, outgrown at that time, and the usual thrift shop fodder like Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey, Kay Kaiser, Teresa Brewer, stuff that no self-respecting young rock and roller would ever, 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 ever listen to. Until a few years later, when I was a kid in unincorporated Northwest Dade County, one of my neighbors, this good old boy from Mississippi, had like a room full of 78s and 45s because he had somebody in his family or somebody he worked with that used to be a jobber for jukeboxes. So this guy would stock all the jukeboxes, and our neighbor would get all the stuff that was left over and thrown away when they had, had their run in the jukeboxes. So this guy just had piles of records all over the place, including a whole bunch of 78s. And this is getting a little bit later in the story. By this time, I was like in my early teens, I guess, and I had a record player that could play 78s. And so he would let me have some of these 78s, and it was the usual cornball stuff I just mentioned. Like all this big band and swing stuff and pop vocals, like Frankie Lane and whatnot, that didn't age very well, but it was still a glimpse into an entirely different time and a different world and a different place that was definitely not unincorporated Northwest Dade County in the late 70s. So even though the music was strictly off the cob, that is to say, corny, and not really of my liking, I was still really intrigued by the sound and the world that you could enter through these things. So, the 78s and the Malcolm Tent story are sort of running in a twisted parallel to each other. So, years and years pass by. I've got a record store, and I'm buying and trading and selling records, and I didn't pay much attention to 78s because by this time, your average turntable only had two speeds, 33 and 45. 78s were like really, really being made obsolescent. So, I like to play records. I don't like to just take a record, stick it on a shelf somewhere and forget about it, or, just kind of pick it up and fondle it randomly and then put it back. I want to listen to it. A record is for playing. I don't care if it's worth $1 or worth $1,000. I want to listen to it. So, the vinyl resurgence, we've all heard about the vinyl resurgence. And by the way, Janice, my good pal Janice says, Glenn Miller rocks. Go, girl. You put on some Glenn Miller and you crank it. And you play it loud enough to let the neighbors hear and let them know where you stand. It's just not my thing. Hey, what can I tell you? So the vinyl resurgence that we've all become so accustomed of, vinyl's making a comeback. When vinyl started making that big comeback and companies started making record players again, for some odd reason they started making record players that played 78s. You could go to some big box store right now and buy one of these cheap record players, and the odds are pretty good that it'll play a 78. So that was revelatory, because now I had hardware that would play the software. Now there was a reason to start getting 78s. That was all I needed, baby. Once I got the player, the records followed. So we're going to talk about some of the really amazing 78s that have come my way that I just love so much. I had read a lot about 78s in the pages of Cream magazine. I've talked about Cream and how subversive Cream magazine was. You can look at past episodes of Tent Talks Tunes on my YouTube channel. Cream, for a long time, had a column called the it was either Unknown or Unsung Heroes of Rock and Roll. I think it was Unsung Heroes of Rock and Roll, written by a guy named Nick Tosches. And that was a great column because he wrote about like the early pioneers of rock and roll, whether they were rockabilly guys or R&B guys or blues guys or gals for that matter, people who really built this city called rock and roll. And one dude that he wrote about a lot was this guy called Amos Milburn. And I don't know, the name Amos Milburn just sounded so cool. And the songs that this guy had, like Good Good Whiskey, and then Bad Bad Whiskey, and Vicious Vicious Vodka, very evocative to a young Caucasian in unincorporated Northwest Dade, Florida. So imagine my shock and awe when I was at a record fair in New York City, the WFMU record fair, and this guy has got a whole table full of 78s. You can always tell them because 78s quite often, when a dealer's got them, are packaged in these like generic yellow envelopes or generic green envelopes. So I saw a great big table full of these 10-inch envelopes, and I was like, oh, 78s. Now that I've got a player, I guess I better buy some. And Amelia, if you want to make some art for me, I would happily accept it. I love art made by real human beings. Talk to me. Talk to me. So I'm looking through these 78s, and looking through 78s is usually a lot of pain because of the things I just talked about earlier. I mean, I don't want to look at another Frank Sinatra 78 ever again. I do not want to see another Bix Biter Becky 78 ever again. I do not want to see another Patty Page 78 again. I just don't. I just don't. But this table at WFMU Record Fair had stuff like Bull Moose Jackson and whoa, Amos Milburn. I'm going to tell my mama, backed with none other than, look at that, baby, Bad Bad Whiskey by Amos Milburn. I hope you guys can see that on the classic Aladdin label. Bad Bad Whiskey by Amos Milburn. And this guy had all this stuff, you know, amazing R&B and jump blues. And I talked to the dealer, I said, so where'd this come from? This is one hell of a collection. He said, well, there used to be this guy who wrote for Cream magazine. His name was Nick Toshis. I said, you got to be kidding me. Yeah, Nick, you know, he's just not collecting records anymore. He's getting old, and he doesn't want all these records in his New York City apartment anymore. So I'm selling his collection for him. Dudes, I got to look through Nick Toshis's record collection. The very records he wrote about in Cream that I read about when I was a kid. And they were fairly inexpensive, too. I got this one for $3. Tons of them. So I didn't buy a whole lot of them. I just cherry-picked a bit. I obviously got the Amos Milburn and a few others, some of which we'll be talking about. But this is an example of really cool music on 78, okay? Because most of what you see in the thrift shops is music that was bought by and listened to by polite white people. You know, that's what Teresa Brewer was all about. This was bought and listened to by nasty black people and played at parties and got people jumping and moving and dancing instead of sitting there politely smiling, tapping their toes and thinking how pleasant a voice Patty Page has. No, this is a prototype of rock and roll. And these kinds of records did not sell in nearly the numbers that Tony Bennett did. And since they were primarily party records, they got played to death, they got broken, they got stepped on. You got to remember, these things are very fragile to begin with. They cannot take a beating. They crack, they break, they fall apart very easily. So the fact that an Amos Milburn record survived the years and was not only that, but still playable, and it's a kick-ass song, god damn, this is cool. And straight from the collection of Nick Toshis. To me, that is a trifecta, baby. That is win, win, win. And look up Amos Milburn if you want. If you want to know about a really key player who helped invent rock and roll. Amos Milburn. Man, oh man, oh man, oh. I don't drink alcohol, but if I did, I would probably have this thing filled up with some vicious, vicious vodka or some good, good whiskey or some bad, bad whiskey. As it is, I use Danbury tap water to toast Amos Milburn. And Nick Toshis for writing about him. And to my tender young brain for being able to assimilate the information. I drink to me. All right. This next one's really cool. Not all polite white people were totally boring. Some polite white people were actually really funny. And one of my favorite TV shows when I was a little kid was reruns of Steve Allen. The Steve Allen show I thought was hilarious. People have derided Steve Allen for being a middle-brow intellectual. I thought the guy was genuinely, genuinely funny. And he recorded tons and tons and tons of records in his day, most of which were pretty corny and pretty boring because they were aimed at that sort of polite Caucasian audience. But he had this one zinger, and I hope you guys can see this. It's a very dark label, the Old Brunswick label. I saw this in a stack of records, and, you know, the A side was called But Baby. All right, that's intriguing. And the other side was called But Officer. All right, I had to figure this out. Turns out it's a really hilarious, sort of kind of mock R&B song. The lyrics are hilarious. And yes, he's a corny white guy, but I love this record. Steve Allen was more miss than hit, but this one's a hit. And this is why it always pays to look at everything. It can be time-consuming and dirty business, but in order to find the gold nuggets, you gotta dig, and you gotta dig hard. And that's why even when I go to the thrift shop and I see a big pile of 78's, and I already know that a minimum of 99% of it's going to be garbage, you just never know. You never know where something like this is going to be lurking. A little bit of backtrack. You know, Steve Allen took a lot of heat for having Elvis on the show, on his TV show, and having Elvis dress up in a top hat and tails and sing to a hound dog. He took a lot of heat for that, but when you look at it in context, Elvis at the time was like really viewed as a genuine menace. He scared middle-class white America. They were terrified of this hillbilly guy who was going to corrupt all their children and make them listen to all this Negro music. They didn't want that. So Elvis was really, really frowned upon severely. So Steve Allen had him on his show, and I give Steve Allen a lot of credit for this. Steve Allen had Elvis on his show and said, hey, everybody, you know, you're all freaked out about Elvis. Well, here we've got the new Elvis Presley. And that's when Elvis comes out with a tuxedo and a top hat and is singing to a hound dog. Steve Allen was taking the piss. He wasn't making fun of Elvis. He was making fun of middle-class white America who were terrified of Elvis. So for that alone, I give a big salute to Steve Allen. That's all right. Now, Elvis, as we know, was quite an interpreter. He was a master interpreter. And so when I was able to find some of the songs that he covered later on original 78, because the way Elvis heard this music was on 78's. How about this, man? The original version of Money Honey by the Drifters, featuring the great Clyde McPhatter. Man, this is one of those records you got to hear on 78 in order to really appreciate it. Not only that, look at that sleeve. Look at the art on that original Atlantic Records sleeve. That is one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my entire life. And hearing the original Money Honey by the original Drifters on a 78 RPM record is magic. Look at the back of that, man. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? That is literally, when I was talking earlier, and when Amelia was listening about real art made by real people with pen and ink, man, it hardly gets better. And look at that picture of Errol Gardner, man. If it sounds like I'm gushing, it's because I am. That belongs in an art gallery. That belongs in a museum. That's one of the best things you're going to see all day. Atlantic leads the field in rhythm and blues. Ruth Brown, Joe Turner, the Clovers. Wow. This is the whole package, kids. A fantastic 78 in an original sleeve. And the way this thing sounds, ugh, Lord have mercy. We'll talk about another record that Elvis listened to on the original 78. And this once again gets into why Elvis was so revolutionary and so frightening to middle-class white America, was that polite white kids didn't listen to these records. You weren't allowed to. You weren't allowed to put on Tweedledee by Laverne Baker. I'm sure it's going to come into focus in a second. It's been pretty good so far. Tweedledee by Laverne Baker. Man, Elvis's version is great, but Laverne Baker's original, forget it. Forget it. I love Elvis, but Laverne Baker's version of Tweedledee blows his out of the water. Just saying. Now you want to talk about somebody else who really redefined the boundaries and crossed the line. And unlike Elvis, this guy kind of paid the price. We're, of course, talking about Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry did the exact same thing that Elvis did. You know, Elvis gets all the ink and all the press for having the audacity to combine country western and rhythm and blues and create a whole new form of music. Chuck Berry did the exact same thing. Chuck Berry was a black guy playing R&B mixed with country western. With Elvis, the R&B influence was more pronounced. With Chuck Berry, the country western influence was more pronounced. It was still an amazing hybrid, you know. Incredible, great stuff. And to hear Chuck Berry on an original 78, and the label on this one's really faded. Between the extremely faded label and my cheap-ass camera, I don't know if you can really see it. This is Maybelline by Chuck Berry. This record defies cliche. Because, you know, the thing is, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, they have their big induction ceremony, and everybody gets together, you know, all the old boring Eric Claptons and those jerk-offs get together, and a whole bunch of them get on the stage, and they all play Johnny Be Good, you know. Sacrilegious. Sacrilegious. To hear, and by the way, it's one of those generic green sleeves I was talking about earlier. You can spot them from across the room. You know, there's 78's in one of these things. To hear Chuck Berry recorded in situ with an acoustic piano and probably an acoustic bass and a real guy playing drums with like a couple of mics in the room and that nasty electric guitar. This sounds like music from a different planet. Can you imagine what it must have been like in 1950 whatever? And being from whatever background you were and hearing Chuck Berry for the first time, like a bomb going off. The first time I heard this on 78, it was like a bomb going off. That's when I really got to understand and appreciate Chuck Berry. His sound, his approach, his true originality. This, in my opinion, folks, is the only way to really hear Chuck Berry. This is magic on a 78. Somebody mentioned earlier, or asked, didn't Steve Allen have Zappa playing a bicycle on his show? Yes, James Pogo. Yes, indeed. Steve Allen had Frank Zappa playing a bicycle. It's on YouTube. Look it up. It's funny. It's weird. It's great. That's another reason why Steve Allen in my book is really cool. Really cool. Frank Zappa covered a song at some of his concerts, and Frank Zappa was really well known to be an R&B aficionado. He was a slave to guys like Johnny Guitar Watson, and also one of my very favorites. The first time I ever heard the song by Andre, Mr. Rhythm Williams, Bacon Fat, was Frank Zappa playing it. And later on, the Cramps did a pretty good version of it as well. It's kind of the same deal. I love Frank Zappa and I worship the Cramps, but goddamn, to hear Andre Williams himself, Mr. Rhythm, and his new group doing the original Bacon Fat in glorious monophonic, recorded in real time on a 78 RPM shellac disc. Dude, chills, spills, thrills. Great graphic design too, as Dennis Hyland pointed out. Anybody who buys the Anti-Scene Before I Hang split 10-inch will know exactly what we're talking about. That's all I'm going to say. Andre Williams kept making records up until pretty much the time he died, and he lived to a ripe old age. And his output was top shelf the whole way. Mr. Rhythm, Andre Williams. This one also was from the Nick Tosches collection, and therefore is very, very precious to me. We talk about Zappa. If you're going to talk about Zappa, you know Captain Beefheart can't be far behind. Janice saw Zappa on Halloween in 1984. Was that in New York City, Janice? If you did, I'm sure that was one wild show. I got to see Zappa in November of 1984, and it's a concert I will never forget. Mm. Mm, mm, mm. He didn't play Bacon Fat, but he did play Whipping Post, and that was pretty damn cool. Where Zappa goes, Beefheart's not far behind. And I've always loved Captain Beefheart. Some people can take him, some people can't. I can take him. In fact, if push came to shove and I really had to choose one over the other, I'd take Beefheart. I love Captain Beefheart. Frank Zappa, the pee pee poo poo wee wee jokes get kind of tiresome after a while, but Captain Beefheart never gets tiresome. His sense of humor never gets juvenile or puerile. Don Van Vliet, the man. And so you can imagine my surprise the first time I ever heard Howlin Wolf. I was like, oh my God. So that's where Captain Beefheart stole his every vocal inflection from. It's all Howlin' Wolf, kids. Don Van Vliet simply wished he was Howlin' Wolf. Man, and Howlin' Wolf, more Goosebump City. Little did I know also that besides slavishly ripping off Howlin' Wolf, I would say that Captain Beefheart owes an awful lot to this guy right here. A recording label mate of Howlin' Wolf, a little guy named, I shouldn't say little, a giant named Muddy Waters. This is one of those deals. This music was originally recorded for release on 78 RPM records. You know, every bit about the recording and production of these things was designed for 78's. They were meant to be played on 78's. So this tune, Muddy Waters, by Muddy Waters, turn your lamp down low. Pretty close to Captain Beefheart. Listen to it carefully. You'll see what I'm talking about. Might take a few listens, but it's there. And it's pretty cool. The B-side, Who's Gonna Be Your Sweet Man? Oh my God. What a question. What a record. Only Muddy Waters has the answers, kids. Man, oh man, oh man, oh. And somebody let me know on the internet research team, if anybody's out there, did Muddy Waters do the original Baby Please Don't Go? Or was that a cover of somebody else's? I talked about that earlier, about all the corny white rockers getting together and doing Johnny Be Good. They've done that with Baby Please Don't Go almost to death. You can go into any Holiday Inn lounge anywhere and hear some band doing Baby Please Don't Go. But man, Muddy Waters doing Baby Please Don't Go? Forget it. Different animal, kids. Different animal. Wow. I was at the thrift shop. I went to the record section, like I always do. And I saw a pile of 78's, like I usually do. In one glance at this pile of 78's, I could tell this was not your typical pile of 78's. This was not Mantovani on 78. This was not I can't even name all the cornball 78's. I've sort of blocked them out of my mind. This was not the usual cornball stuff. Even though one of the labels you see over and over and over at the thrift shops is Columbia, the sleeves don't look like that. And the labels certainly don't look like that. Let's see if we can get a little focus in on this. If anybody out there can read Japanese, Dennis Highland, can you be of any help to me at all in this? I want to know what that record says. I want to know what that side of the record says. And I want to know what that side of the record says. Apparently, this was in Waterbury, Connecticut. I guess somebody had been living over in Japan for a while in the 1950s and maybe early 1960s and bought a whole bunch of records over there, and they were all on 78's. And they went back to the United States and shipped them all back, brought their record collection with them, and they all ended up in the Goodwill at some point. This, once again, if you want to talk about music from another world, I can't even begin to describe just how wonderful this record, which was never really meant for release outside of Japan. It was meant only for a Japanese audience in the 50s. So we're talking about a super specific time and a super specific place and a super specific type of music. Man, just wonderful. I can't even describe it. It's great. It's beautiful. And yes, Dennis Highland, I will take a good picture of this, a good clear scan of it, and we can find out what this is, because I got to know. I have got to know what this is. I just want to make one thing clear. I just want to set the record straight. You know, speaking as a Caucasian, not all white people are corny. I've, used the term corny white people a lot in this episode of Tent Talks Tunes. Not every Caucasian musician who made a 78 RPM was on the same level of Teresa Brewer. No, there were some white people who made really cool records. And you see these occasionally. But for the same reason that you rarely find Amos Milburn records in good shape or Chuck Berry records in good shape when they're 78s, is these were party records. These were records that people listened to when they had friends over. I'm talking about this guy right here. Hank Williams, baby. Hank Williams. Yes. Come into focus, Hank. Look at that, Ramblin' Man by Hank Williams. Oh, that's some good stuff. The B-side being Take These Chains From My Heart. Ramblin' Man was pretty down-tempo, but Hank Williams, party music, setting the woods on fire. And once again, this is a specific time, specific place, recorded and manufactured in a certain way for this format right here. That's why it sounds so wonderful. Like your average dubstep record would not sound good on a shellac 78. Your typical EMD record would not sound good on a shellac 78. Conversely, I think that, Hank Williams sounds pretty good in hi-fi on a regular, vinyl album or CD, but this is the way you're really supposed to hear it. This is where the nuances come out. This is where the mysticism is unleashed and sent into the ether. This is how it happens, kids. 78 RPM shellac records. MGM, possibly the worst label that ever existed. Cheesy, sleazy. Their motto was art for art's sake. Bullshit. You can research the history of this label in this movie studio. That's just one man's opinion, mind you. I'm not going to testify to that in a court of law. That's the way I see it. A toast to my opinion. Here's a guy who was very Caucasian and absolutely not cornball in any way, shape, or form. This dude is one of the most salacious, probably evil mofos who ever lived. This guy was straight from the mountains, and he was on a label. You talk about a party record, you never find you never find him at all, let alone in playable condition, man, on the Sun label. Carl Perkins. It's the same deal as Johnny B. Good. It's the same deal as Baby Please Don't Go. Blue Suede Shoes has been reduced to the most trite, tired, boring cliche imaginable by trite, tired, boring cliche musicians. But when you hear it as it was originally waxed by Carl Perkins and his band of hillbilly cats, when you hear this, you understand. The real blue suede shoes on a 78. And look at the B side. Blue suede shoes on the A. Honey Don't on the B. Oh my God. The Beatles do a pretty serviceable version of this, but man, we're talking about Carl Perkins and the original. And I'm sure all you eagle-eyed collectors will notice that you've got one variant of the Sun label on one side of the record and another variant on the other. Two different typefaces. I love it when that happens. Doesn't happen too often, but sometimes it does. That's really cool. That's why collecting is so much fun. Love collecting. Love it! Got one more for you. One more! One more. And this, once again, goes back to the Nick Tosches collection. I was looking through these just like table full of records. I mean, Nick Tosches bought tons of records on 78, so he could write his column in Cream magazine and help wash my brain. Glad he did it. And I don't know if you guys saw, but on my Facebook page a few days back, I posted one of my smarmy smart guy posts about what a drag it was trying to find the Holy Grail on eBay. Because I typed in Holy Grail and saw what the search results were. It came up with like 9,000 search results for Holy Grail. Searching for the Holy Grail has never been easy. And I don't really have too many Holy Grails. There's really nothing I really like got to have. I'm happy with what I've got. I'm like Sinead O'Connor. I don't necessarily want what I don't have. But it always really makes me jump out of my skin a little bit when I find something that I didn't know I wanted. And all of a sudden it's right there in my hands. And Jennifer says, yes, collecting is fun when you pay hardly anything for it. True fact. There's not a single record here that I showed you guys. The most I paid for any one of those records was $10, and that was for the Andre Williams Bacon Fat 78. Because you're just not ever going to see that one. You know? I paid $10 for it. No regrets. Everything else I showed you guys was $1, $2, maybe $3. And in this case, well, we'll get to that story in a second. So the thrill of finding something I didn't even really know I was looking for, and suddenly holding it in my hands. One of the names that Nick Tosches talked about in his column was Wynonie Harris. Yes. If Andre Williams was Mr. Rhythm, then Wynonie Harris was Mr. Blues. Rhythm and blues. And so I figured if Nick Tosches wrote about it, it's got to be cool. So I always had Wynonie Harris in the back of my mind. So I'm going through the Nick Tosches collection, and sure enough, I see this record. There's one of those green sleeves again. And there's Nick Tosches' own typewritten identifying sticker, so he could find the Wynonie Harris record. And sure enough, it's on the really cool label, Bullet Records. I saw the label, I fell in love. I saw the title of the song, Lightning Struck the Poorhouse, and I really fell in love. Looked on the B-side, a song called Dig This Boogie. Alright, that's kind of generic, but still it's Wynonie Harris, and, you know, any song called Lightning Struck the Poorhouse is at least got to have a chance of being cool. There it is. So I take it out the sleeve, I look at it and, ooh, there's a big old chip in it. Oh dear. I think the only record in the entire stash that had a big old chunk taken out of it like that. So I was kind of bemoaning it, and the dude said, you know what? Just take it. It's got a big chip in it. Just take it. I was like, cool, thank you. I appreciate that. Even though it's got a chip, it really only affected the first, like, literally 7 or 8 grooves on the side. So you can still play almost all of the song. You're only missing the first few seconds of each side. Whatever, and it's aesthetically kind of displeasing, but you know, a free Wynonie Harris record is a free Wynonie Harris record. Imagine my double dog dang damn shock and amazement when I was reading one of my Sun Ra reference books, and they talk about the first record that Sun Ra ever appeared on. Back when he was still Herman Blount in Birmingham, Alabama. What was the first record that Herman Blount ever played on? Well, wouldn't you know it? Dig This Boogie by Wynonie Mr. Blues Harris. Not only that, Dig This Boogie is actually a showcase for Sun Ra's piano playing. It's his stride piano. It drives the whole song. And he's got a pretty good presence on the B-side too, Lightning Struck the Poorhouse. Now, if you people have seen more than one episode of Tent Talks Tunes, you know how much I love Sun Ra. Oh my god. If you guys want to get into a specialist show, and if there's any demand for it, I'll bring out the Sun Ra collection, and we'll go through. That's going to have to be like a multi-part series of Tent Talks Tunes. Because I made it my goal a long time ago to try to get every single Sun Ra record there was, and that is a gargantuan task. But I got a few. Anyway, god damn. This dude just gave me the record because it had a big old chip in it, and it turns out to be Sun Ra's first ever session. This might qualify as one of those 9,283 holy grails I found on eBay. I don't even know if this thing is really worth a lot of money particularly, but fuck me, it's cool. It is so cool. So cool. A crown, a gem in my crown, and a crown on my head. And that's it. That is my tale of my love affair with 78 RPM records. If you guys go back behind the partition here, there is actually one of those cheap portable record players I was talking about that you can go to the big box store and buy one. I got it right over there. I'm going to play some 78's when I'm done signing off with you guys. So, right on. And Janice, yes, Janice, my good pal Janice, who's tuned in right now, she saw Sun Ra at the Grotto in New Haven. Janice, you make me very envious, but I still love you. The fact that you saw Sun Ra at a time when I didn't even know who he was, I will not let that come between us. Promise. So yes, thank you everybody for tuning in and listening to me yap on about 78's and music. This episode will, as always, be on my Facebook page in perpetuity. You can also go to my YouTube channel, Malcolm Tent. Many episodes of Tent Talks Tunes are archived on my YouTube channel. And please don't forget, I've got some really cool stuff coming up on my label, TPOS. The teaser, the pen and ink drawing of me and Mad Brother Ward. We got something cool coming up. It's going to be on TPOS. If you guys are fans of this band right here, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, if you like King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, I got a few things coming up by them. Official, authorized, legit releases by King Gizzard on cassette 8-track and reel-to-reel tape. I love my arcane formats. If I had a way to make a 78 of King Gizzard that was affordable, I'd do it. So I got a lot of stuff coming up. Be sure to check me out, because I'm good. What can I tell you? I'm good. I make the effort. I try real hard. But I couldn't do it without you guys. So again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I hope everybody's staying sane and doing well. And if you're here in the Northeast like we are, I hope the blizzard didn't totally bury you. I fully intend to be back in about 167 hours time. So until we meet again, this is Malcolm Tent saying so long from the Nutmeg State. Whoa!